Hey Patreon viewers, so I've just made a video for the public channel, which you might be seeing around the same time that you see this Patreon video, but this was one of the weapons featured in that video. It's a Sudanese Kaskara, 19th century weapon used by the Dervishes, the various different tribes, Beja most famously perhaps, in the Sudan, during the Sudan Wars, as we call them in Britain. So in the 1880s and 1890s, the Mad Mahdi, as he was called at the time, the Mahdi basically expanded his realm and his influence and started conquering certain areas of the Sudan, and it was a threat to Egypt, and Britain for various reasons had an interest in making sure there weren't any threats to Egypt, Suez Canal basically, and so they went to war with the Mahdi. So as a result, lots of these swords ended up back in Britain. Now over my years of collecting antique swords, I have owned a handful of these, not a huge number. I've never had a really good quality one, unfortunately. If I do lay my hands on a really nice quality one of these, I will keep it. This is a nice basic quality one, but you do get some that are really fancy, you know, with silver hilts and silver pommels and stuff. But one of the things that's really struck me owning these and handling these, well, there's a number of things that struck me actually, but one of the things that's really struck me is how regulated they are. And it's funny because we have a perception that within tribal societies, you know, be it Zulu or Maasai or whoever, or indeed, you know, the Beja in Africa, we have a sort of perception, I think, that their weapons are sort of more random and organic and kind of less regulated. And the funny thing is that that's kind of wrong. In fact, there was quite a lot of regulations, particularly in Zulu weapons, in terms of the spears that they carried, the size and proportions of the spears, the sizes of the knob carriers, the sizes of the shields, who carried which type of shields, which patterns on the shields, all this kind of stuff in Zulu society. Coming up north, up to the Sudan, if we come to the Beja, there are diverse weapons from that region. You shouldn't think that they're all using exactly the same sword, but the Kaskara is a remarkably homogeneous is not really the right word, it's remarkably uniform, that's the right word. It's a remarkably uniform weapon. They don't vary very much. They're all constructed in the same way. They all have a pommel that's essentially made of wood and leather and doesn't have any balancing properties at all. It just stops your hand slipping off the end. They all have a wooden grip wrapped in leather that is connected to the tang via a pin or rivet, which goes laterally through a hole in the tang there. So they don't come through at the end, they're not peened at the end or anything like that. They have a partial tang, or it's kind of like a 3/4 or more like a kind of 4/5 tang that comes most of the way down to the pommel. A bit like a Japanese tang actually, like a wakizashi or katana. So the tang comes down here and has a hole through the side, and they have a pin through it, just like with the Japanese weapon, holding the grip on. And then the guard is made very, very similarly to a medieval European or Islamic guard. In other words, it's forged. You can actually even see, I don't know if you'll be able to see on camera. Let's see if you can. You can actually see some forge marks there, lamination lines where the forge weld has been put together. So they were made, I suspect, I know some medieval swords are made like this, they'd essentially fold a strip over and then forge weld it at the ends, leaving a kind of eye-shaped hole in the middle, which the tang would go through. And also, you can't see on this one, but there are, again, I'll make it focus on the hilt, this languettes, they always have these languettes. And the languette, there's a mirrored one which actually goes down into here as well, just like on many Islamic swords, including things like shamshirs and kiliches. And the languette that goes down there is always covered by the grip wrapping, but very often with antiques, of course, the grip wrapping comes off or perishes, rots, and you can see that languette down there. So these guards are made in a very uniform way, and that style of guard is one that you find, as I say, on many types of Islamic sword that have different blades on them. And then these but one of the things that really amazes me is how regular these blades are, and they are practically always, the full-size ones, they do have children's ones, but the full-size ones are practically always 35 or 36 inches long. Now that's really long for an infantry sword, okay? That's usually kind of cavalry length blade. And not to say that they didn't fight on horseback as well, they did, but the majority of Beja certainly were fighting on foot with shields. And it's very kind of regulated, and I have wondered, was that length chosen by them because that's what they felt gave them the best advantage in a one-on-one fight or a group fight with shield and sword? Or is it because the majority of these blades, or at least a lot of these blades, were imported from European blade manufacturing, German, Solingen mostly, blade manufacturing centres, and the Germans made them to a fixed length and exported them, and so when they arrived in the Sudan they went, oh well, that's the length it is, that's the length I'll use. And then the ones that were copied in the Sudan, they just made them the same length as the German ones. I don't know is the answer. I don't think anyone knows, but I do think it is fascinating to note how every aspect of the Kaskara's design, and we could say this of Takuba's to some extent as well, but every aspect of the Kaskara's design is sort of uniform and regulated, which is not something that we necessarily normally think of armies of the Sudan in this period. Anyway, there we go. I hope that's been somewhat interesting, and I'll see you again obviously soon for another video on Patreon and another one on the public channel. Cheers for watching, folks.